everybody. It is Thursday, June 27th, Friday Eve, debate day. You're listening to the Mo.news podcast. I'm USWNT.
And I'm Jill Wagner. This is the place where we bring you just the facts.
And we read all the news and read between the lines so you don't have to. Jill, I understand your inbox is pretty full right now.
Moshe, we have recorded more than 500 episodes. So if you do the math, that is literally hundreds of hours of us talking, sometimes off the cuff. And in those hours of discussion, perhaps the most controversial thing that I have apparently said, or at least admitted to so far, is that I have not read any of the Harry Potter books or seen the movies. And as they say, the fallout was immediate. One of our listeners actually told me that he is officially shook. Moshe, I hope he still is going to listen to the podcast. So if you didn't hear yesterday's podcast, Moshe had mentioned Harry Potter in On This Day in History, to which I made that admission.
Yeah, Jill. And I warned you on the pod. I was like, listen, I think I said on the pod, you'd be hard pressed to find many people on Earth who haven't seen a film or read a Harry Potter book. And you're looking at her.
Okay. In fairness, though, I did also hear from a lot of people who said they are with me. They said that maybe they're about our age and it kind of like they missed the boat
right,
for it.
Because you were already like, we were too old as the Harry Potter books came. Not too old. I mean, you can't be too old, but necessarily like they were where they were really vibing is like if you're born after 85 or so.
Right. And a lot of people said they're like, I've never read them. I have no interest. A lot of people, though, said that given that I have a daughter who is actually now a first grader, graduated from kindergarten today, was her last day, that they said wait until maybe a couple more years and read the books with her. And they said it's great that that's how they bonded with their kids and instilled this love of reading in their children. So it will not be on what I'm going to be reading this weekend. I'm going to be, we'll save that for a couple of years.
All right. But rest assured, folks who are shook, Jill has at least one Harry Potter book on her summer reading list.
Yes. And I heard you and I appreciate all your feedback. Okay. Time for the headlines. It is debate night in America. What to expect when Joe Biden and Donald Trump face off tonight. Sticking with politics, moderates won the day in primaries in New York, Utah, and to an extent, Colorado. To the Supreme Court, a big ruling in favor of the Biden administration when it comes to social media. And in yet another bizarre turn of events, another abortion ruling quickly appeared on the Supreme Court's website. So it wasn't leaked, but it appeared on the court's website and was then quickly taken down. We'll explain.
You have one job. Just don't put up the cases before they're released every day. Jill, we're trying to figure out how many people at the Supreme Court have access to post decisions on the website. There can't be that many, right?
Overseas, the closed-door espionage trial of U.S. journalist Evan Gershkovich kicks off in Russia, what we know. And Kenya's president backs down on all those tax hikes after the deadly unrest we told you about earlier this week. Plus, the booming business of pets. No surprise given the Mo.news community and all of our attachment to our furry friends. And Moshe, we're going to do a quick look at the big names that are headed to Paris for the Olympics.
Dun, 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 dun. Yes.
You've been waiting a long time.
Jill, I love that theme song. It's like what it brings me so much pleasure to listen to the John Williams Olympics fanfare.
We've got some of the stars also that have been left off rosters, from soccer to gymnastics to track. We're going to cover it all. Plus, Moshe is on this day in history.
Jill, we look back at the summer of 98 today and all the musical hits of those few months. There's a whole number of classics that came out 26 years ago today.
1998, Moshe, you are speaking my language.
You know what also came out that year, Jill? Harry Potter.
Ouch. Sick burn, Moshe. Okay, it is debate night in America. President Biden will face off against former President Trump for 90 minutes in Atlanta. The debate starts at 9 p.m. Eastern time. And Moshe, it is not an exaggeration to say that these 90 minutes could potentially change the trajectory of the entire election.
Yes, we don't want to go overboard here. We are still 4.5 months till Election Day, and this debate could be long forgotten by November, but a major, memorable, especially slip up tonight could have a real impact. I know Democrats who are pins and needles, praying that there's no Biden senior moment tonight. I know Republicans who are hoping that Trump comes in at a 5 or a 6 and not a 10. So there's a lot of people watching tonight. And there could be a moment that we see replayed on social media between now and Election Day.
And by that, when you say come in at a 5 and a 6, that's like when I tell my daughter, if she's being really hyper, like, you're at an 11, I'm going to need you at a 7, right? That's right. What you mean.
There's
by
some
that.
Republicans who want him to be more policy oriented and not come in, let's say, as hot as he did in the first debate in 2020.
Okay, so this debate is going to look and feel very different from previous debates. For one, this is the earliest presidential debate in history. It is happening before both conventions. It's actually 3 months earlier than any previous debate in modern history. As we have reported, Trump and Biden could not be taking more opposite approaches to this debate. Biden has been taking a more traditional approach. He's been prepping for several days. He's been holed up at the Camp David presidential retreat doing mock debates with advisors. And for Biden, the question is mostly about his age. He really needs to show Americans that he has the mental and physical stamina to handle another 4 years leading this country, and arguably, Moshe, the most important job in the entire world, and also explain what he has accomplished and what he has planned for the next 4 years. Another goal of Biden's to portray his opponent, Donald Trump, as unhinged and equally unfit for office. As for Donald Trump, there are no mock debates. And from what we could tell, not a lot of debate prep at all. Advisors are reportedly having issue discussions with him, and they're telling him to focus on topics like the economy, crime, and inflation. Poll numbers have shown that voters trust Trump more than Biden when it comes to those issues in particular. So, Moshe, we are just hours away from the big showdown. Unlike previous debates, there will be no audience. Mics will be muted for the person who is not talking. There will be commercial breaks. That is something new. So what will you be watching tonight?
So the big thing here is who's rustier, who comes in with a bit more practice. Both of these guys did not take part in primary debates this cycle. In particular, Trump didn't show up to any of the GOP primary debates, and Biden didn't really face much of a competition. So both men, one active president, one former president, not really used to being questioned on stage, receiving aggressive pushback. And when you look at the past 20 years, sitting presidents have not fared well. And so this has been a concern among the Biden circle. If you look back, President Bush, George W. Bush in 2004, in his first re-election debate against John Kerry, did not fare well in 2004. He had to make a comeback in the subsequent debates. Barack Obama, in his first re-election debate against Mitt Romney in 2012, also did not do very well, was sort of detached. In fact, some people came away from that first debate being like, oh my God, Mitt Romney is going to win the election here. Obama's not up for another 4 years. He had to come back strong in subsequent debates. Trump, 2020, first debate. We've played clips of it where he was, stepping on Biden, overly aggressive, etc. Some people point to that loss, that debate loss, as one of the reasons that he ended up losing in 2020. So the Biden folks concerned, listen, President Biden, we got to get you ready here. We cannot afford a first debate slip up, given the scrutiny here and given that there's only going to be 2 of these and they're not happening sort of week by week like they typically do in the fall. This one is going to be replayed and remembered for several months until the September debate. So out of practice, who's more rusty? That's going to be interesting. We've talked about how unprecedented this is in terms of how early it is. Are people really paying attention here? Is it a win for both of them if there's no mistakes and sort of like no memorable moments, nothing catastrophic? We shall see. The no studio audience is going to be interesting. The muting of the mics, who's going to benefit from that? Does it actually help Biden when Trump interrupts and looks aggressive? And the fact that they'll have his mic muted, is that going to hurt Biden, so to speak, especially if he sort of does, a mumble or fades as he sometimes does without, Trump kind of jumping in there. That was one of the things that Chris Christie, I remember, brought up in 2020 to Trump, saying, like, let him just talk. When he messes up, it's going to show his age. But Trump never really let him talk.
Most just want to mention Dana Bash and Jake Tapper, CNN anchors. They're going to be moderating this debate. But equally important will be the producers and the directors in the control room who are going to have that responsibility of figuring out when to actually mute the mic. Because as you're mentioning, it could be really important in the way that these guys are portrayed.
Yeah, and, lead to some weird, awkward silences. Like, who knows if, they'll also try to shout things at each other, even,
Right.
they're only 8 feet apart. It's not that far away, measure in your home 8 feet. And, the guy who you think is going to destroy this country is standing 8 feet away from you and saying really nasty things about you. Can you hold yourself back? You likely will get picked up by his mic. So
exactly.
There's a lot happening here. The commercial breaks are going to be key because they basically get a breather, get to go back in their corners, run to the restroom. Who knows what's going to be happening then? So, we just don't have much precedent for this. But there'll be a lot of eyes on this. Typically, viewership for recent debates, somewhere between 60 to 80 million Americans watching. But that's in the fall when the debates typically happen. This is a summer debate the week before July 4th. So what will be the audience for this? Again, TBD. But that said, given the robust social media environment we have, I imagine that's how most Americans will take this all in. One thing, Jill, when it comes to how much this matters, is people look at the polls and see that about 95% of voters vote for the candidate with the same partisan identity as them. These are two known entities. Most Americans have an opinion about Joe Biden. Most Americans have an opinion about Donald Trump. But we've been talking on this podcast and on all our platforms about the double haters. 1 in 4 Americans consider themselves a double hater, meaning they don't like either of these guys. And many of them may stay home. Some of them might vote for a third party. So while it's not about convincing them necessarily to vote for you, you might be convincing them to not vote for the other guy. There are still some persuadable voters with these double haters. And you need to motivate your base. And that could be part of it, too, is that maybe you're not winning people over with this debate. But, if you're Joe Biden, you're trying to convince the left that, they need to be fighting for you, that, that the next 4 years, if the country's run by Trump, is a real problem, and vice versa. Trump wants to say, you cannot afford 4 years of Joe Biden. So anyone who still sort of harbors resentment towards me, is a Nikki Haley person, et cetera, come aboard the Trump boat because Biden's going to be a problem. So you're both speaking to convincibles and you're speaking to the base to motivate them. A lot of items on the agenda for both of these men tonight.
As Meghan Trainor would say, it's all about the base.
She's talking about a different base, Jill.
Okay, speaking of politics, Tuesday was a primary day, and the big takeaway is that moderates seem to have won the day in Utah and New York, and to a certain extent in Colorado. We'll start with New York. Representative Jamaal Bowman, one of the 8 members of the left-wing group of the House that calls themselves the Squad, he lost in the most expensive congressional primary ever. It was a major win for centrist Democrat George Latimer. He is a very well-known politician in the Westchester area. The pro-Israel lobbying group AIPAC spent more than $14 million on ads for Latimer, which Bowman allies and some media outlets are making a very, very big deal of. But as we say, all politics is local. And Bowman, you could argue, was really just out of step with his district. He is very anti-Israel to the point where he questioned whether Hamas actually raped Israeli women on October 7th, which is very, very well documented and goes beyond just questioning Israeli policy during this war. He later apologized after the UN confirmed sexual assault did happen. Also, if you remember, he pulled a fire alarm in Congress, which many local residents said was just embarrassing. As a member of George Santos's former district, I hear ya.
A fellow New Yorker who's been embarrassed by their congressman this cycle, yeah.
He also peddled in 9/11 conspiracies on a blog. Moshe, you posted on Instagram as well. He also voted in a way that was not in line with his district.
Yeah, at the end of the day, it's an interesting district, right? Because it entails an urban area in the Bronx and then a very suburban, higher income area of Westchester County, suburban New York City there. But Bowman voted against police funding, national defense, infrastructure bills that 80 to 95% of his fellow Democrats supported, that Joe Biden supported. Then you, of course, had the fire alarm incident. He's a former school principal, pretending that he didn't know what a fire alarm would do, that that's a way to open a door, didn't show any remorse, was censured by fellow members of Congress. And Jill, I heard from some people in the district who were just like, we just thought that was weird for a sitting member of Congress. So it appears politically, whether it's Israel, police funding, infrastructure spending, etc., just out of step here. He was also accused of never really visiting certain parts of the district. So there was that. And then, there's been a lot of back and forth about who had more outside spending, because Bowman also got a lot of money. Nearly 90% of his direct money came from contributors who don't live in his district. So a lot of national interest. He goes down. The moderate Dem looks like he'll survive. There's not much of a Republican challenge this fall. Also, just one note in New York, former CNN anchor John Avlon, you might be familiar with him. He won his Democratic primary. He's a centrist. He is going for the seat, Jill, in your neighboring district of Long Island.
Yes, District 1, which is Eastern Suffolk. And that is a district that George Santos, because he'll never go away, had said that he was actually going to run for as an independent. And then he changed his mind, I guess, because no one was supporting him. Anyway, yes. So I'm glad you mentioned that one as well. Okay, then there's Utah. A pair of moderate Republicans won their primary elections Tuesday for U.S. Senate and also the governorship over far-right candidates who are Donald Trump loyalists. U.S. Representative John Curtis, who won the GOP primary, he is running for Mitt Romney's U.S. Senate seat. Romney would definitely be considered a moderate. He is retiring. And Governor Spencer Cox, they both say that they still support Trump and many of his policies, but they haven't been in lockstep with him. And they have taken a few different positions on some issues. And again, both considered moderate.
Yeah, Trump supporters with an asterisk above their name. Jill, finally, just staying out west, Colorado. Lauren Boebert, we've mentioned her on the pod before, pretty well known with her media profile, very right wing. She was facing a loss in her current district. She barely won last time around by just a few hundred votes. So she opted, instead of having another competitive race, to move over to the neighboring district where there's a retiring congressman. She faced several primary challengers who effectively split the vote. And so she, while not living in the neighboring district, won the primary over there. So it appears she will remain in Congress by pulling this whole, I'm going to represent a different district this go around, which led some of you to ask, you can do that? Yes, you can, folks. If you are looking at the Constitution, the founders said you got to be 25 years old, and that's about it. You got to live in the state to be a member of Congress. You don't actually have to live in the district, and so there you have it. Lauren Boebert staying where she lives, representing the neighboring district.
Time for the speed read from the Washington Post. The Supreme Court on Wednesday sided with the Biden administration in a dispute with Republican-led states over how far the federal government can go to combat controversial social media posts on topics like COVID-19 and election security. So the court declined to impose limits on the way President Biden's administration may communicate with those social media platforms. State leaders in Missouri and Louisiana, in addition to individual social media users, had filed a lawsuit accusing the Biden administration of violating the First Amendment by operating a sprawling federal, quote, censorship enterprise to improperly influence platforms like Facebook and Twitter to modify or take down posts related to public health and elections. The case arose from a barrage of communications from administration officials that were urging the platforms to take down posts that they deemed as misinformation. And the topics were the COVID vaccine and claims of election fraud.
Yeah, a whole variety of things. Also, Hunter Biden and the allegations around that the laptop is Russian misinformation. Effectively here, the justices in the 6-3 ruling saying, no, none of that violates the First Amendment. The government has a right to make these requests of social media companies. But ultimately, the social media companies do their own thing. They have their own policies that they didn't feel that they obligated these companies to do anything. The ruling, an interesting mix, Jill, of 3 conservatives and 3 liberals here. Amy Coney Barrett, the conservative, wrote the ruling. And they said, first of all, these plaintiffs don't have required legal standing, meaning they weren't hurt by this to sue the administration. But then they go on to say that companies like Facebook, like YouTube, have their own content moderation policies that place warning labels on certain posts or delete others under their own rules, and that the challengers here didn't demonstrate that the company's actions to remove the post were traceable to the government. And so the justices here saying, and you could hear this in the arguments, the justices' questions, they were worried about limiting the government's ability to make requests. And effectively what they're saying is they didn't force these companies to do anything. The government can ask for whatever it wants, and then it's up to Facebook and Google to say, no, yes, no, yes, which is what they do. But the litigants here felt that the government went too far, and agreeing with them actually were the dissenters, the 3 conservative justices, Alito, Thomas, and Gorsuch, who dissented, Alito writing, government censorship of private speech is antithetical to our democratic form of government, and today's decision is highly disturbing. Jill, it's the first of 3 rulings we're expecting in the next week here related to social media and censorship.
Moshe, we're also waiting for a bunch of other big cases from the court this week, like the United States versus Donald Trump, which looks at whether presidents are immune from prosecution for official acts they took during their time in office. There is also another abortion case about whether emergency rooms in states with strict abortion bans must sometimes perform the procedure. And as for that case, the Supreme Court's publications unit inadvertently and briefly uploaded a document to the court's website with the decision. It was quickly taken down, but Bloomberg got a look and says that the court is poised to allow abortions in medical emergencies in Idaho. That is, again, according to a copy of the opinion that was briefly posted on the court's website. The decision would reinstate a lower court order that had ensured hospitals in the state could perform emergency abortions to protect the health of the mother. The posted version indicates that the majority will dismiss appeals by Idaho and Republican leaders in the state without actually resolving the core issues in the case. Moshe, it is just pretty wild, though, that the court, quote, inadvertently posted this decision, given the leak of the Roe or the Dodd decision 2 years ago.
Oops, they did it again, Jill. Now, it's not the same thing, right? Last time, clearly, it appears somebody leaked it to Politico, the newspaper, in advance, weeks in advance, to potentially try to sway opinion, try to create, public protests over it. In this case, this appears to be less intentional, at least on the surface, and more like, these cases are coming out today, these cases are coming out tomorrow, accidentally posted it, and it went live as opposed to being in draft mode. So we'll wait to hear more from the Supreme Court as to why that happened. But this is an interesting case because ultimately this comes down to federal law versus state law, and whether certain federal laws, in this case, it appears a majority here, again, a 6-3 majority, saying they override the state abortion ban, at least on the surface, though this will continue to receive more arguments in a lower court. Jill, there's a few other cases beyond that. We've told you about the homelessness case, what cities can do, what states can do to limit homelessness, how far they can go. And then there's an opioid case related to Purdue Pharma, and a few other cases related to government power that we're watching. We typically think they're done in June, and they typically are done in June. And it looks like this term will slip into July next week, depending on how these next 2 days go.
From the Wall Street Journal reporter Evan Gershkovich appeared in a Russian court Wednesday to face a false accusation of espionage in a secret trial. It will offer him few, if any, of the legal protections that he would be accorded in the United States and other Western countries. The 32-year-old American journalist has been imprisoned since March of last year, when he was arrested while on a reporting assignment around 900 miles east of Moscow. Gershkovich, the Wall Street Journal, and the U.S. government vehemently deny the accusations against him. The U.S. has designated him as wrongfully detained and has called for his immediate release. Earlier this month, Russian prosecutors approved the indictment of Gershkovich, falsely alleging that he was gathering information about a Russian defense contractor on behalf of the CIA.
Yeah, and they haven't released any evidence. They typically don't. The Russians don't. The trials in these types of cases have about 100% conviction rate, and he's facing up to 20 years in prison here. So far, he's already been in prison here for 15 months in one of Moscow's more infamous prisons, allegedly passing the time reading classics like War and Peace by Dostoevsky, also playing slow-moving chess by mail with his father, where they're literally writing letters to each other and playing a chess match. In that way, he also reportedly is able to keep himself in shape with the 1 hour break he gets every day to go out and do some exercise away from his prison cell. As of right now, our understanding is that the next hearing in the case is August 13th. The big question, Jill, ultimately will be, how will this prisoner swap work? We have a podcast coming out soon on prisoner swaps, but taking you behind the scenes on that. And the feeling is that Putin doesn't want to give Biden a win this election year, because Putin sort of wants Trump back to end that war, put pressure on Ukraine. So it is unlikely that you see any sort of prison swap happen this year ahead of the election. But the question is, of course, who does Putin want in return? Recently, Putin also took another American. This was the half American who had donated like $20 to a Ukraine charity. They found it on her phone, and they're holding her as well. Putin typically does this when he doesn't feel he's getting enough attention. He takes more people as collateral for a prisoner exchange.
All right, now to an update on the situation in Kenya that we told you about yesterday from Reuters. Kenyan President William Ruto on Wednesday withdrew planned tax hikes, bowing to pressure from protesters who had stormed parliament, launched demonstrations across the country, and threatened more action this week. The move will be seen as a major victory for a week-old youth-led protest movement that grew from online condemnations of tax increases into mass rallies demanding a political overhaul in the most serious crisis of Ruto's 2-year-old presidency. But some demonstrators say they are still going to protest and they want him to resign. The protesters are pretty defiant. One prominent social justice activist involved in the protest called for a 1 million people march, saying on social media, "The arrogance is gone, but the lies are still there." Yesterday, they unleashed, quote, goons and police to kill peaceful protesters. That will not stop us. Again, this all coming after violent clashes between police and protesters at the assembly and nationwide left at least 23 people dead and hundreds wounded.
Yeah, so in the statement, the president backtracking here, saying that he's listening to the people of Kenya who have said loud that they want nothing to do with this bill. And so leaders are asking young people to call off the protests to avoid any further loss of life. And apparently they're blaming the intelligence services for giving the government poor advice on all of this, Jill. So this begins, hopefully, a more peaceful situation in Kenya, but that remains to be seen. Ruto says he's going to begin a dialogue with the youth without going into details as to what that means, and work on austerity measures, because at the end of the day, the issue they have in Kenya is this deep debt and then taking more debt to pay the debt. The majority of the money in Kenya from the government now goes to paying off debt to countries like China, to the International Monetary Fund, to other places they've borrowed money from in the past. So they're in this sort of downward cycle. And so they try to explain to the young people in the country, which is like, we got to raise money somehow. How are we going to do this without defaulting and making the situation worse? So it's a situation we'll continue to monitor as we still try to get a sense of the fallout and the death toll from Tuesday.
From Axios, as Americans grow increasingly attached to their pets, they are spending more and more money on them. Pet ownership, as well as love for pets, surged during the pandemic. About 2/3 of Americans own pets. 97% of them say that their pets feel like part of the family. That's according to a Pew Research Center survey. 51% of pet owners say their animals are as much a part of their families as the human members. And all this is giving rise to a booming business of premium medical care, treats, and vacations for pets. Vet prices have jumped 60% in the last decade, according to the New York Times. Modern vet clinics kind of look like human hospitals. They've got state-of-the-art MRI machines, and they are staffed by oncology and cardiology specialists. Plus, vets are getting bougie with fancy interior decor, cold brew on tap, and exclusive membership programs.
Jill, is the cold brew for the dogs, or is it for the people, the owners?
A dog on cold brew, I think, is a bad combination. Just saying.
All right. So we're also reading here that there are some pet owners that are now picking their homes based on proximity to parks and vets, even designing their bedrooms if you're doing some renovation to be more pet friendly as we look at the various trends here. One thing to make note of, Jill, as we talk about the cost, as you spoke about the cost there, only 4% of pet owners have insurance. And even then, sometimes your options are limited. And, I've heard anecdotes from people where they go and their, pets are sick and they come back with bills in the thousands of dollars. And, people love their pets and they want to do whatever it takes. But the prices keep going up. Jill, beyond all that, on the fun front, you are seeing a whole new line of more human-grade food options from a bunch of startups for your pets. There's also dog bakeries, dog ice cream parlors. I'm probably not telling any dog owners or any pet owners something they don't already know, but it's really remarkable what you're seeing out there. Jill, I remember being in an aisle recently in a store looking at toys, and my wife Alex was like, those are not for our daughter Olivia. Those are pet toys. I was like, it's hard for me to tell.
And Moshe, we wanted to do a quick Olympics roundup. To start this from NBC News, one of the biggest names in women's soccer is not heading to Paris. Alex Morgan did not make the U.S. women's national team. She is, by the way, the team's active leading goal scorer and fifth on its all-time list. But she was left off the roster of 18 players released Wednesday and also not asked to be an alternate.
Okay, back to the soccer story. As far as the explanation as to why they left Alex Morgan, the head coach saying that it was not an easy decision. It was very tough given the record, given the history. But the coach says she wanted to go another direction and so ended up selecting other players. For her part, Alex Morgan saying she's disappointed, but she looks forward to supporting and cheering along next month in Paris.
All right, now to gymnastics. The Olympic trials start Friday. From the Washington Post, building the U.S. Olympic gymnastics team is simple at first. Simone Biles. She is widely considered the best gymnast ever. She's the obvious first pick. She has been dominant since the Tokyo Games when she pulled out, if you remember, during the games from the team and the individual all-arounds to prioritize her mental health. Since those games, though, she has won the all-around title at the World Championships last fall. So as long as she is healthy, there is virtually no chance that she does not compete in Paris. And the next selection nearly as straightforward, but of course, nothing is set in stone.
Nothing set in stone. We got a lot of stars this year on women's gymnastics, Jill. Always one of the highest rated sports, one of the most popular ones to watch. So some of the names to pay attention to when it comes to the women's gymnastics team. You got Charlize Jones, who's been excellent throughout the entire Olympic cycle. She won the bronze medal in the all-around last year, the silver the previous year. The question will be her health. Then you got Suni Lee and Sky Blakely, who also have an edge here. Lee, you might remember, won gold in the all-around in Tokyo. Blakely has done very well in recent national championships. So if they can replicate those results at the trials, they're probably going to earn spots here. And so a lot to watch, Jill. I've heard from a number of people. I think I'm already going to put this on what I'm watching for tomorrow's podcast. But a lot of folks very excited about watching the Olympic trials this weekend.
Okay, now to track and field from CBS News. Star sprinter Sha'Carri Richardson officially qualified for the Paris Olympics after winning the 100 meters at the trials in Oregon this weekend. So she finished with a time of 10.71 seconds, which is the fastest women's 100-meter time in 2024. If this name sounds familiar to you, Richardson, if you remember, was disqualified from the Tokyo Games because she tested positive for marijuana, but she will now be one of the favorites in Paris as she makes her Olympic debut.
Jill, I always find that remarkable, right? 10 seconds, 100 meters. Like, literally 10 meters in a second. It's just incredible. And right now she's the fastest woman in America. They always give that title to the person who wins the 100-meter. But she almost didn't make it again. She had a near disaster in her trial heat on Friday as her shoelace became untied during the race. But alas, it appears she will be there. Other names to look out for: Melissa Jefferson and Twanisha Terry, who also qualified with just behind 10.8 and 10.89 seconds for the 100 meters. So that'll be fun to watch this summer. All right, now time for On This Day in History. We begin in 1844. The founder of the Church of Jesus Christ and the Latter-day Saints, known previously as the Mormons, Joseph Smith, killed by a mob on this day in 1844. Smith first claimed in 1823 that he had been visited by a Christian angel who spoke to him about the holy text. Over the next several years, he dictated an English translation of that text, and in 1830, the Book of Mormon was published. But then, 14 years later, on this day, after attracting thousands to the faith, he was killed along with his brother in Illinois. There had been some dissenters within the leadership. The division had gotten violent. He would eventually, Joseph Smith, be succeeded by Brigham Young. All right, a piece of presidential trivia, vice presidential trivia, if you will, on this day in 1924, 100 years ago today. Lena Springs was the first woman to have her name placed into the nomination to be vice president. This was at one of the first conventions after women were given the right to vote. This was the Democratic Convention in 1924. She was on the Credentials Committee. She received several votes for the VP nomination. It was a mess of a convention for the Democrats. Republican Calvin Coolidge would go on to win that election. Sticking with the 1920s here, on this day, the U.S. Marines officially adopted a bulldog as their mascot. The mascot comes from the tenacious fighting they did during the First World War that earned them the name the Devil Dogs. They come out of the war, and the group saw the dog as a good way, as we're talking about pets here, Jill, to help with recruitment. So Brigadier General, who oversaw Quantico, thought the bulldog would be a great mascot, help the recruitment, and that is the backstory of the Marines and their mascot. Jill, I mentioned we're going to look at the summer of 98 earlier in the pod. And
I remember.
Well, today we looked back at the top 3 songs on the Billboard charts. This week, 1998. Starting with number 3 on the Billboard charts, we have Next, the group Next, with their song Too Close. Number 2 on the charts this week in 1998, You're Still the One by Shania Twain. And number 1 on the Billboard charts, The Boy Is Mine, The Boy Is Mine, The Boy Is Mine. Brandy and Monica with The Boy Is Mine.
Moshe, I was graduating from high school, getting ready for college. Life was good.
They don't make them like that anymore, Jill.
Yeah.
I'm waiting for the AI machine to pump out some great summer hits this summer.
All right, Moshe, another very well-rounded podcast. Tomorrow is going to be a big one. We're going to have a debate recap. But for now, a big thank you for everyone for listening to the Mo News podcast. If you like what you hear, share this with your friends, please. It will help us grow. Follow us, subscribe so you don't miss an episode, and review us in the App Store. And
join me tonight live on Instagram, 9 p.m. Watch the debate. We'll do live analysis. Take your questions. It's going to be exciting. Mo News Instagram. Join the party.
Moshe, maybe I'll jump on for either a pre-game or a post-game.
Jill, I'm looking forward to your take afterwards. Basically question number 1, which is, how much did this debate matter? We'll have that answer at 10:31 p.m. tonight.
All right, guys. See you later.